Okay. Everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Those of you in person who made the time to come here today, we really appreciate it. All of you watching online, can you hear me okay? And if so, we have a question and answer box at the bottom of the page. If you could just give me a thumbs up and just indicate that you're okay, would be wonderful as well. So yes, welcome to our legislative learning session live. Sorry, 1 second. Thank you. Yes, if you could please mute your phones. Thank you, Paige. I did not do that myself. So we are Voices for a Safer Tennessee. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit coalition dedicated to advancing firearm safety policies that both protect our communities, but also respect our Second Amendment rights. We are Tennessee founded, we are Tennessee funded, Tennessee led, and focused on Tennessee-based solutions. So session is less than a week away, so we want to offer a space where we can pull back the curtain on what it is that actually happens inside the legislative, inside the Capitol, inside the building, and of course, how it all works. So how does it work? From when a bill is introduced to where it becomes law. We want to make sure that you all understand that at home, and that we can explain that to you, what our policy priorities will be in the 2025 session, as well as how we will define success in 2025. So first, I would like to introduce Abby Ham. Abby, she is our moderator. She's the morning anchor for WBIR in Knoxville. She has helped produce Emmy award-winning stories and has even won a Edward R. Murrow Award, which in the broadcast world, that's equivalent to a Pulitzer. She is often found with her 3 children and her husband. She has lived and worked in 3 states, but currently calls Knoxville home. So Abby, if we could pass it over to you, we thank you so much. Thank you for watching at home, and thank you all for attending in person.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm so glad to be here in Nashville. I've worked in Tennessee for going on 2 decades now, and I just love it. It's not where I'm from, but it's a place that is more home to me than any other place. So thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here. And I just want to point out that we do have some data sourced by Voices for a Safer Tennessee to guide our conversation this afternoon. More firearms are stolen from vehicles in Tennessee than any other state. Tennessee has the 3rd highest rate of unintentional shootings by children. Firearm injuries are the leading cause of death among children in Tennessee, and most firearm deaths are suicides. Tennessee's firearm suicide rate is nearly 50% higher than the national average. And I just want to thank you all for being here this afternoon and for taking time out of your busy day. I also want to thank Belmont University. What a beautiful campus. Yeah. And they have really rolled out the red carpet for us this afternoon. Their tech people have been amazing, and we just want to say thank you for hosting. So I want to start by introducing our panel. We have Lowe Finney with us as a former state senator and Senate Democratic Caucus chairman who represented West Tennessee's 27th district from 2006 to 2014. He played a key role in creating Tennessee's mega site authority, now collaborating with Ford Motors on Blue Oval City, and sponsored significant legislation like the Crooks with Guns Act. A practicing attorney since 2002, Finney resides in Weakley County with his wife Tiffany and their 2 sons, Paul and William Andrew. We are so glad that you're here. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Sam Whitson is a former state representative serving the 65th district, which includes parts of Williamson County and Middle Tennessee, a retired U.S. Army colonel. He has brought his leadership experience to the legislature, focusing on infrastructure, education, and veteran affairs. Whitson is known for his bipartisan approach and his dedication to improving the quality of life for Tennesseans. He is also one of Safer Tennessee's newest board members. Thank you for being here as well.
Thank you, Abby.
It's been so nice to talk to you this afternoon. Erin Rogas is the policy director for Voices for a Safer Tennessee, in addition to serving as the policy advisor for former Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist. With 2 decades of experience in policy and political strategy, Erin is very well experienced working in the U.S. Congress on state-level political campaigns and at the Republican National Committee. Of course, you're going to be here for this, and we're so glad to have you. This is your cause. All right. We are going to take questions at the end of this from the audience. We're going to save about 10 minutes for that, but we're going to start with just some of the basics. And starting with you, tell us a little bit about why you were involved in this and why it's important to you.
Well, thank you. And again, it's an honor to be here, and I appreciate the invitation to join y'all today. You know, I spent 26 years in the regular Army, and I got very familiar with firearms, and I trained soldiers and led soldiers for that 26 years. And I grew up with guns. My first gun I received was a Sears and Roebuck's 20-gauge shotgun. I still have it. It was so long ago it doesn't even have a serial number. It didn't come with a serial number. And so grew comfortable with guns. I collect World War I infantry rifles, Mausers, Enfields, and Springfield. But for the things that you mentioned, Abby, what the challenges we have regarding firearms and firearms safety, I'm a real big believer in responsible firearms ownership, and that's why I am proud to be part of this organization.
It's great. We're glad to have you. Would you tell us a little bit about why you're involved in this organization?
Yeah, well, I would say I grew up much the same way in West Tennessee. I think I got my first gun at 12 or 13 years old. I still have it. I've added to that collection over the years. I have young children. I've got a son who's 13 and another son who's 9. When you get to be about that age as a young boy, you start to want to know about these things. There's an interest in hunting. And so those conversations are already taking place in my house and several of my friends' homes as well. I've been out of the legislature for 10 years. When I was there, the conversation was really around not only the rights of hunters, but around if you had a permit and had been trained, where could you then take your firearm? That was really the conversation taking place. That's no longer the case anymore. It's not about where can someone who's been trained take their firearm. It's much broader than that now, as we know. And so I think there's reason to look at it, and there's certainly a reason to be concerned, and there's certainly a reason to come together from all parts of the political spectrum and say, how can we make good decisions on firearm ownership going forward?
Absolutely, thank you. And Erin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement in this organization.
Sure, thank you, Abby. Really grateful to you all for being here today, and this means so much because I worked on this issue actually over a decade ago in Congress. I worked for a Republican member, kind of one of the few at the time that was working to pass like a universal background check bill, some other firearm safety laws, and we were doing this right when the Sandy Hook school shooting happened in 2012. And we really thought at that time we were going to be able to get something done. It was a little bit shocking to us that we didn't see progress then, but I've really kind of been heartened by being able to re-engage on this issue with Safer Tennessee this past year and a half. And I do think focusing on state-based, Tennessee-based solutions, we really can kind of see some forward progress. And I have 3 little kids of my own at home, and want to make sure they're growing up in a safe Tennessee.
Absolutely. All right, Representative Whitson, we're starting with you. Next week, the Tennessee General Assembly reconvenes for its 2025 session. It's a big time. Legislators will craft a state budget. They'll consider a number of new laws, including some related to firearm safety. This process can often seem complex, so let's start with some of the basics. What is the makeup of the General Assembly? Can you share some of your insight?
Right. Under the state constitution, it calls for 99 state representatives, and 1/3 of the General Assembly is senators, so we have 33 senators. Senators are elected every 4 years, representatives every 2 years. Each representative represents around 70,000 Tennesseans, and senators around 210,000, and that is based on the United States Census. And there can be a variance of 5%. A lot of people don't know this, but an interesting fact is U.S. congressmen have to be, it's down to the person. They cannot have a 5% variance when they designate the House districts for Congress. So next Tuesday we'll gavel in, or the General Assembly will gavel in for the 114th General Assembly. They'll take about 15 days, 2 weeks or so to organize, and during that period, members will get their office assignments, their parking assignments. They'll find out where and this is where the speaker has is very important. The speaker will determine your committee assignments, your office location, your desk location, even your parking spot in the garage. And members also will probably have already done this already. They will fill out kind of a wish list of which committees they would like to be on. And then the speaker will determine who will be the chairman of the subcommittees and the full committees. And then there will be a joint session where we'll elect or select the 3 constitutional officers, the comptroller, the treasurer, and the secretary of state. And then the clerk staff will be appointed, and then also they will start. They'll set the bill filing deadline. Normally, that's 10 legislative days after they gavel in. So there's a lot of work going on, a lot of reorganization, and it's a very busy time during that break and when they come back in.
Senator Finney, can you walk us through how a bill becomes law? You actually wrote this down. You have a whole page-long list of what it takes to get something actually passed, and it is a process, to be sure.
I'm surprised it's this short, actually, because at times it feels longer than this. But I'll tell you that I guarantee you that most legislators, since the day they gavelled out last spring, they've been thinking about what they're going to file now, and they've been working on it all year. And they've been talking to their counterpart in the House and the Senate. They've been talking to the various groups around the state, much like this group, about what's important. They've already started filing those bills. They're not going to wait until they get there. They've already started working on them, at least drafting them, talking to the legal staff. And so the bill can originate in either chamber, the House and the Senate. They'll have a sponsor in each. They'll have co-sponsors in each chamber as well. And then they'll go through the committee process. So Sam was kind enough to write down all the committees, and you had more in the House than we had in the Senate. A lot of subcommittee reviews. You talked about different subcommittees in the House. Ultimately, what will happen is if you have, let's say, a bill that deals with the environment, it'll go through maybe 1 or 2 subcommittees in the House, 1 committee typically in the Senate. Mm-hmm. If it costs some money, it'll end up in the Finance Committee in both chambers. It'll end up in the Budget Committee, because you got to talk about it in regards to the entire budget as well. So just because a bill may look simple on the front end, it still has a long way to go and may not actually pass until the end of the legislative session, and it has to pass both chambers, be signed by both speakers, and end up on the governor's desk for signature.
If you don't mind, just to hold up the sheet of paper, it's all listed out. I do want to know, what is the time frame of how all of this works? Can you give us
It's all going on at the same time. And they have a particular calendar committee in the House that we didn't always use in the Senate, but they will, in each chamber, you will see typically on a Monday or maybe even the week before, the calendar will come out telling you what's going to be heard in the next few days, so that you're not surprised, or you shouldn't be surprised about what's going to be heard on Tuesday, for instance, in that committee. And that happens every week up until it's passed. And what can be frustrating and what is very common is you get to the committee, you think, I'm ready to hear to talk about this bill or even vote on the bill. It gets pushed to the next week. And so, again, even the simplest bill that looks like you're going to deal with it this week, you got to be ready, because if you're there to advocate for something, if you're there to speak on something, if you want to pull on a legislator's sleeve for a while, you got to be ready to do that for the entire session, because it could take the whole session to get some of these passed.
Patience is key,
Patience.
I'm imagining. Okay, also, these are part-time jobs for our lawmakers. A lot of them have other dynamic professions. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. When I saw that this question was going to come up, I went through and looked at all the different jobs that representatives have. We have everything from lawyers and ministers. You know, one time ministers under the state constitution were not allowed to be in the General Assembly, but the courts found that unconstitutional in 1978. We added a provision in the state constitution to allow ministers. But you have a lot of retired folks, small business owners, and it is really a full-time job. It is a commitment that you make to the people of Tennessee, and it's very important that you follow through with that.
A full part-time job.
It's a full-time, part-time job. But you are paid year-round.
Oh, that's it. Thank goodness for that. Well, Senator Finney, in the 2024 election, all 99 House seats and half of the Senate seats, 16, were up for election. While we have some new members due to retirements and a handful of incumbents losing primaries, none of the seats actually changed party control. The General Assembly still has a Republican supermajority. Now, what does that mean moving into this session and bills that are passed?
Well, let me put it in context for at least when I was there. When I was elected in 2006, in 2007 was when a Republican was elected to Speaker of the Senate, which changed things in the Senate. We had expected to have a Democrat. John Wilder was our Speaker of the Senate and had been for decades at that point. So in that session, you saw in the Senate a split chamber. You had an even number of Republicans and Democrats and one independent. In the House, you still had a Democratic majority in the House. With each successive election, you saw more Republicans elected and fewer Democrats. What I saw at the time was, especially in the Senate, because it was evenly divided, it couldn't have been more evenly divided, you had to work together. If you wanted your bill to pass, you had to have bipartisan support. That's no longer the case. When you have a supermajority of either party, they control the dialogue, they control the committees, they control what's going to get voted, they control when it's going to get voted on. And so they control what amendments are going to be proposed, what amendments are going to be adopted. And so when you have a supermajority, I think the concern rightly is, are the rights of the minority being heard and being addressed? And I think that's an ongoing conversation, an ongoing question that should bring a group like this, or any group who's got questions and concerns about legislation, should make you more involved, frankly, and make you want to be there and participate more, because unless you are directly involved in that supermajority, you're going to have a harder time, I think, getting into the debate.
And a lot of times it's divided along not just party lines, but also between urban, suburban, and rural.
That's right.
Representatives may have a difference. One time I had a bill that was in danger. It was a good bill, but some of the leadership over on my side didn't care for this Republican Senate sponsor. So there's a lot of dynamics that goes on behind the scenes that people need to be aware of, and that's where it's very important to reach out to your representative or senator to see what are the chances of this bill moving forward.
That's really the biggest thing you can do as a constituent in this state.
That's true.
Over the last decade, we've seen the rollback of many of Tennessee's firearm safety laws. What do you think, we'll start with you, is driving the shift?
Well, we've seen the change of in the makeup, the supermajority in both chambers. Republicans are more apt to be pro-firearm legislation than the Democrats have recently. And we've seen the change in the organizations that promote the firearms agenda. You see the NRA has gone from a safety training organization to an active political organization. And then with the internet, you see a lot more smaller organizations get involved and advocate, strongly advocate for firearms legislation. And it is the internet and the communications has changed the dynamics. And one thing you said about the change, what we have found as far as the supermajority, primary elections really decide who is going to be the state rep or state senator. So you really have a small group, an organized group can change the dynamics of a state. And we see that in the primary elections, and they will go on to win the general without much opposition. So these small groups, very organized, very polarized, will help promote a candidate and help get them elected. And so I think that is what really has changed over the years. It's the organization, the common bond that these groups have, and the internet.
Well, you were recently in office, so you have firsthand knowledge of this. Now, it's changed a lot, Senator Finney, since you were in office. Tell us a little bit about how that has changed.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I remember very clearly talking at length and hearing debates on the floor about what it takes to get the gun permit at the time, because at that time, the majority in the Senate, the Republican majority, it was a source of pride for them. Many of them had sponsored that legislation years earlier. They tried to get it passed. They ultimately did get it passed, and they wanted to talk about it, and that was a good thing for them to do. And so, for years, that was the discussion. If you know what you're doing, if you've proven it, then can you carry a weapon? In my last year in office, 2013, 2014, is when the conversation began to move away from that to open carry and more towards, we're not really worried about what you can show. We're not worried about training. We're not worried about these safety precautions that have to take place before you can have the weapon or before you can carry it. That's when the conversation really started to take off in a different direction. And at that time, the vast majority of people were just not really willing to have that conversation. But of course, that's changed in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So 5 to 10 years, you think
Yeah,
it's taken?
a lot has changed.
Tell us about the leadership structure of the House and Senate. Who's in charge of setting the legislative agenda and deciding what bills get a floor vote?
Yeah, so in each chamber, in each party, you'll have a leader, you'll have a caucus chairman, and in the House, they'll typically have maybe a whip, I believe, at times. Each party, again, will have a whip who helps get the votes ready, or maybe will count votes to know how a bill is expected to perform, so to speak. The leader in each party is really instrumental in driving the legislative agenda for the week and for the whole session. So typically what you'll have is the Republican leader in each chamber will have the budget bill, and they may carry different bills for the governor, very important pieces of legislation. They may carry other bills as well, but they'll at least carry those. And they'll drive exactly what is taken up in the budget, because as Sam knows, you'll bring a bill that you might at first think is not going to cost any money, or maybe not much. And then you get this thing called a fiscal note, which says it's going to cost money, which means now you've got to deal with budget folks. Well, now that brings in a whole other discussion and brings in more committee time as well, which places into jeopardy whether or not your bill is ever going to pass. Well, the legislative leadership, those are the key people to see whether or not it's going to pass. Those are the ones who are going to help get the votes together or not and see if that bill actually makes it to committee or not. So you have those people in each party, and they're basically doing a lot of the same things in both chambers.
Now, tell us a little bit about the governor's role in this whole process.
Right, the governor will present a draft budget here pretty soon. That's kind of the blueprint for the General Assembly, what we will operate on. And also that will be coming out soon. But also the governor, he has a key role, of course. He'll do the State of the State address. That'll be probably the first week of February and then we'll know more about his agenda. There's been talk about a special session, and that coming up on this legislation regarding school vouchers. And then what will happen if it's a special session that happens before the General Assembly convenes, that could change the whole committee makeup that you would normally see in the 114th General Assembly. So it'd be interesting to see if that happens. But also the governor, he has kind of the pulpit that he can advocate. He can call a news conference to promote the agenda that he has, and also who he appoints as his commissioners and legislative liaison staff also tells us what his priorities are and what his where he wants to go with legislation. And like you said, if I could say about the fiscal note, when your bill comes back with the fiscal note from the budget folks, that could send your bill to the black hole. You'll never see it again.
Yeah, exactly.
Because everything, the simple stuff has a cost, and you have to be able to cover that cost. It's really good to have leadership support your bill if it has a cost, and the governor to get him to sign on to it so they could put that into the budget document. All we have to do as a General Assembly each year is to pass a budget. If we went down there, and that's the only requirement we have, is to pass a budget. And so if something has a cost, you have to take that cost for something else. So everybody's defending what their agenda, and especially if there's a fiscal note attached to it.
I'm assuming you don't want your bill to go into the black hole. Is that what it's called?
I've had several go there, and I had nowhere.
And never to be
saw 'em
seen again.
I was fortunate. I was on budget or finance, ways and means full and subcommittee, and one of the most powerful persons in the state house is the chairperson of the finance, ways and means committee. And there's a subcommittee and there's an appropriations committee. They work all close together with the speaker and determine what makes that final cut. In the Senate, y'all had what y'all called a sweeper.
We had a sweeper at the time, and I was on the finance committee. We had a budget committee and a tax committee, and then we'd have a sweeper bill that brings in all the other bills to essentially get them into the budget.
It's good to have your bill in the Senate sweeper committee because there's generally things that cost less than $50,000. One thing I want to add too, in the Senate, senators can bring any number of bills they want if they can find a House sponsor. In the past, representatives have been limited to introducing 15 bills a session. Now, I understand there's some talk to reduce that to 10 bills, and that's why it's very important for groups to get in early with their representatives to, if they have a bill they want to advocate for or see passed, is to contact your representative or senator early because, like he said, they've already been introduced and they're working right now.
Well, and we talked about this being one of the most important things you can do, aside from voting, is contact your representative if you care about an issue. How did your constituents get to talk to you? What was most effective?
Well, first of all, it is the people's house, and we want people to be involved. Your constituents, like I said, we represent 70,000 people. And before I forget, I would like to make sure the audience knows they know about the General Assembly website. That is one of the most effective tools to follow legislation. You can actually see floor sessions or live committee sessions live, or it's archived and you go back and watch it. You can track how your member voted and who voted for bills, who voted against bills. It's just an excellent tool for the public to follow to see what goes on. It's very open. It's easy to access, and in fact, members use it a lot. A lot of times I'll see how my bill is doing in the Senate, and then before I introduce it in the House. But as far as how to influence your legislator, it's very important to establish a contact with them early on. Know who represents your district. You know, it's amazing to me, and what's disappointing is when you run for office, you have a walk list of voters and who you think you could get to vote for you. You will skip over 10 or 15 houses till you find somebody that's actually has voted in the election. And it's disappointing. If you ask 90% of the Tennesseans out there, who's your state rep or who's your city commissioner, they couldn't tell you. I had people say they voted for me. I said, oh, that's great. Where do you live? Kingston Springs. I said, well, I don't represent Kingston Springs.
But thank you for your vote.
But it's very important for groups, though, to be organized. And if you do go to see a representative or a senator is advocating for your group, make sure you take constituents with you from his or her district with you, because they will have that establishes a contact that they need to follow. How you advocate is very important. Form letters, we get thousands of form letters. Personal letters to your legislator is so important. I do have to remind people sometime when they send me stuff, knucklehead is not hyphenated. They could be, they could, you know, you don't pay attention if somebody really attacks you on that. But it's important to be polite when you reach out, make your emails personal. And also it's key to know the legislative assistant or the staff or your senator and your representatives, because they're the ones kind of the gatekeeper and can get you in there to see them. And I had a rule in my office, if I have lobbyists out there waiting to see me, if a constituent comes in, and Darren Jernigan taught me this, they go to the head of the line over anybody else. Yep. So, but make your emails personal, be polite, be respectful. And when you do go meet with your representative, it's very important to control the agenda, because if you come in to see me and I got 15 minutes with you, and then I find out that your aunt and I went to high school, you don't want me to talk for 10 minutes about your 15 minutes of how, hey, I knew your aunt, she played basketball at our school. You want to stick to the agenda and control that. And again, a thank you note, follow-up is very important.
That's good advice,
Yeah.
really good advice. Now, we know that change takes time, so talk a little bit about that process. Actually making change in a state is difficult. How does that work?
Yeah. Well, it works exactly like Sam mentions. I would add to this list, it is hard for a legislator, or it should be hard for a legislator to decline an invitation to meet with you in the district. Field trips, I used to get emails all the time. Can you come to this school? Can you come to this ribbon cutting? Can you come to this whatever? That's what keeps us busy on the weekends when you weren't in session, and then for the rest of the year when you weren't in session. And I would tell, especially members of this group and any group, invite your legislators to come out and see something so that they can actually get an idea of exactly what it is you're dealing with. And don't quit there. Stay in contact with them. Write the note. Make the phone call. Don't assume that one email and one phone call is going to get the job done, because especially during session, and especially in those last 2 weeks when all you're doing is working on the budget, you're getting thousands of emails, you're getting hundreds of phone calls, and you want to break through all that. You want to break through all that. So be persistent, be patient, but especially in those off weeks and off months, invite them to come out and show them something. Take them on a field trip. Take them to a site. Take them to something they can put their hands on so that it imprints on them. This is important. This is important in my district. I'm not just hearing someone talk about it in my office in Nashville. It's right here at home. And that's why I need to remember it and deal with it when I get to Nashville. And I guarantee you, the more you do that, the more you're going to be in that conversation in the budget committee.
Advocating 24/7, 12 months out of the year is very important. Lobbying and staying in contact with that legislator.
Meaningful conversations, I'm assuming, do better than belligerent conversations.
Always. But you learn, even with people that we disagree with, I find most people are very polite and respectful.
Good.
And then, and you can, and if you talk to folks, you can find you do have some common interests and concerns that you can build on from that. And that's why it's very important that that when you do go in there, that you establish what you want to accomplish, but also you ask for a commitment too during that. Will you support this, or can I come back and talk to you again about this piece of legislation? But again, it goes back to, you got to have a connection to their home district also, so they know that people in their district are watching this and following this, and they will continue to do so in the next election.
Really good advice. Thank you both. Erin, let's talk about your past legislative session with Safer Tennessee. This was the first one y'all were actively engaged in. Talk about the progress on firearm safety from your eyes and your experience.
Sure, happy to. And I know there's kind of this sentiment that nothing can be accomplished in this space, but we really actually did see some progress in this past session, in part thanks to some of the votes that Representative Whitson was taking. So last session was the first session in nearly a decade that we actually reduced firearm access instead of further loosening our safety laws. And so I'll give you some examples of what that means, because some of these bills aren't going to be like the sexiest headline-making bills, but they are improving the safety of our communities. Safer Tennessee helped pass one bill, HB 1600, and this prohibits firearm access for individuals ages 18 to 25 who are violent juvenile offenders or who had a mental health adjudication as a juvenile. This actually goes beyond even kind of federal requirements here, and this bill is important because we know those age groups 18 to 20 is the age at the highest risk of committing a firearm homicide, also elevated risk for firearm suicide. Safer Tennessee, we also were part of a coalition that advocated for Jillian's Law. I know that's kind of important in particular to the Belmont community here. They lost a student, Jillian Ludwig, in November of 2023 to a firearm tragedy. This bill, it prohibits firearm access for those who are deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial. Previously, those individuals were not actually added to our background check system. They are added now. And it also sets up a process for them to be committed and receive treatment. Previously, they were released to the streets, even if they had a violent past, potentially, so, which is tragically the way that Jillian was killed. Another thing that we worked on, part of it is also getting adequate funding for these issues. One of our priorities is expanding background checks. And one thing we found is that our background check system here in Tennessee needs some additional funding, that we had a backlog that they were working through and that they needed additional resources so that the TBI personnel, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations personnel, would be able to better work with counties, their court clerks there to make sure that their local records, their court adjudications were being timely processed in the system so that when someone does go for a background check, they are getting the accurate records there, and they are going to be denied if they have that felony conviction. And part of our work ultimately is also going to be stopping those bad bills. We are still going to see every year some pieces of legislation that will roll back our firearm safety laws. One in particular that we really worked on to stop last year was one that would have allowed for the permitless open carry of loaded long guns. So you would have been able to carry, for example, a loaded semi-automatic rifle down Main Street. That was a bill that we helped stop. So that's where we did see some positive things happening this past session, and we do think this coming year we can continue to build on that.
Heading into this session, what are your most important priorities?
Sure. So we really believe that we are going to be successful if we can pass policies and kind of induce behavior change that can at least save one or more Tennessee lives. And so what does that look like? Some of the laws we passed this past session, we do think are going to help save lives. Going forward, we've already had some productive conversations with Governor Bill Lee, with some legislative leaders that want to do more of the sessions on community safety. So what could that look like? Specifically, we're looking to kind of find some creative ways to incentivize behavior change around more effectively and more regularly securely storing your firearms and encouraging more private sale background checks. Right now, private sales aren't subject to a background check requirement. We're also looking at ways to kind of strengthen and better enforce existing laws. One thing we're looking at is like the domestic violence order of protection law. There is one county, Scott County here in Tennessee, that's done a great job where they've amended their form to improve accountability there so that it's clear when someone they are dispossessing themselves of their firearm where that's going to. That's a model that we would love to see kind of adopted further in the state. And then, we'd also like to expand Tennessee's successful PSA campaign that the legislature previously passed in 2023. That there's a statewide PSA campaign focused on encouraging secure storage of firearms, increasing education there. We do think that's something we can continue to build on and reach more Tennesseans with. So those are all areas I think we'll be working on this session.
We've talked a lot about the process of the legislative session, how this works, how hard change is. Do you think we are going to see change on firearm safety in Tennessee? I'll start with you.
Well, and Erin's right. We have found ourselves on defense on several bills over the years, and I read the bill on offense and promoting good firearm legislation. Some of the things that really got me in the past was, for instance, there was a joint resolution or House resolution that the militia should be armed at the same level as an infantry unit in the Army. I fought hard against that. I just remember in my unit when I was a lieutenant, we had 90 millimeter recoilless rifles and landmines and anti-tank weapons and machine guns, and the sponsor of this resolution felt that the militia should have. So you're always fighting things like that. And then also, I think last year there was a legislation that allowed people to carry weapons and firearms into schools. I think that died in committee. There was a lot of pushback on our caucus against that. But we will have a new election for a new governor in less than 2 years. I think I don't know what the governor's agenda is going to be. He's basically a lame duck governor as far as coming up in this last General Assembly. So what he will promote or support will be interesting. I agree with Erin. We have to be proactive. We have to be involved to make sure we pass good firearms legislation.
I'm going to ask you the same question, Senator Finney.
I think you just, yes, first of all, is it possible? Yes, I think it is possible. But you've got to just stay at it. You've got to keep the conversation going. You've got to understand, and something we probably learned the hard way as a freshman legislator, you're going to have a lot of defeats, probably, before you get those big victories. And there's a certain stick-to-itiveness, if you will, as my grandmother would say, that you kind of have to have. And you just expect that. You know, change takes time, and it takes a lot of hard work, and it takes persistence. You know, there was a discussion earlier about the budget. Well, you know, the governor started telling us about his budget back in the fall. He started having his budget hearings, which is what every governor does. So when he starts doing that, the legislators start seeing what's going on in the budget. They start getting their bills ready. The best time to start thinking about the bills for this community is then, right? So the best time was yesterday. The second best time is today. When can we start getting into all these conversations? And if it doesn't go anywhere this session, then how can we improve on it in the next session? And just continue to grow at the grassroots level, keep having the conversations at the grassroots level, because it does take time, but that persistence pays off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. We're going to open it up to the audience now, both live and on the web. If you have a question, you could submit it in the form on our webinar link. You can also ask here in the public. If you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll come around to you. For any of these three. We have one.
Thank you all for being here today. My name was just
Oh. Huh?
Thank you all for being here today and talking about these important issues. My question is about what do you see are some practical ways that we can encourage people at the community level to, I guess, get involved when they start to see warning signs of somebody who's heading towards gun violence. I know that there's a lot of concern about personal freedom and privacy, and we certainly don't want to have a surveillance state, but it seems in so many of these incidents that happen, there's always somebody who said, well, yeah, we knew this person was posting some radical things on their Facebook or written a manifesto, or so it seems like the community-led organizations and might be in a good position to advocate just vigilance, or where do you see this this balance?
Well,
Sure.
Well, right now in Tennessee, there is a shortage of beds for the mental health crisis that we are facing. And I think law enforcement and the communities have recognized that we do have a mental health crisis in the state. A lot of people who commit these offenses and crimes, not just firearm related, but trespassing, vandalism, all have mental health disorders. And we need to increase the number of beds and spaces available for those suffering mental health crisis. But I highly recommend, if people become aware that someone is a danger to themselves or the community, that they let local law enforcement know about that. That is very important. That's the first step.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just add to that, your point is well taken. It's one of the reasons, one of Save for Tennessee's 3 policy priorities is to enact a temporary transfer law, which is to set up a court process to temporarily remove access to firearms for individuals who are posing a credible risk to themselves or others. There are certainly cases, like you mentioned, where the family is aware that someone is having suicidal ideation or has made threats that may not rise to the level of involuntary commitment, but is still certainly a concern, and they want to reduce the potential of them having access to a firearm. So that is something we certainly support states that have done that. It's in 21 states, I believe, to date. They have seen positive effects. Connecticut and Indiana, which were the first to implement it, they've actually seen a reduction in their suicide rates. Connecticut as much as 15%. And other states, including Florida, they found that when they put it in place, as much as 10% of the calls that they get or reports that they get for temporary transfer, it's for individuals who are making these mass threats of violence. So it has been shown to be effective, and so we think it could be a good model for Tennessee as well.
Anyone else?
I'll ask a question. Alice Rowley with the Children's Hospital Alliance, and I wanted to ask Representative Whitson, and then I suppose Senator, you as well, though I don't know your history quite as much on the topic. But Representative, you did so much over so many years around helping the disability community, and particularly your work on Katie Beckett legislation. And I thought you might reflect some for this group here and then online, thinking about the types of coalitions that are broader than maybe the single issue of firearms, but broader around children's health and veterans work, and maybe what insights you might give to people listening about building those broad coalitions to bring about change like you did with Katie Beckett.
Thank you, Alice. Good seeing you. Yes, there was a piece of legislation brought to me by a group of lobbyists representing the disability community. And this was not in the budget, but it was going to cost the state several, I think up to $30 million to implement. But they did a very effective job advocating, going to members' offices and working with the leadership to support this legislation, to make sure we had the funding. But advocacy groups is so important to any kind of legislation you want to pass. For instance, we had a group, there's a bridge out on the Natchez Trace Parkway. They approached me, and I carried a piece of legislation to designate that bridge as a public health hazard for the state of Tennessee. And we were successful getting the National Park Service through advocacy groups to put up a barrier, and I think it's, from the last report, it's been very successful to stop the suicide out there on that location. So, it takes a large group of folks working together in a common purpose to get something like the Katie Beckett legislation passed. And also we carried bills for the Down syndrome groups, and also for those who have problems just communicating directly with law enforcement to make sure that this, if there's a stop, that it does not become something that's a tragedy later on. But thank you for that question. Did I cover what you?
Yeah, and then Senator, if there's ideas of groups that you might see bringing to bear on the issue of firearms safety, maybe non-traditional.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would just say generally, you know, when session starts, we would get a lot of emails from all the associations, right? The Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs of Police Association, on down the list to meet with them about their agenda for the session, their priorities. And we would take those meetings and meet with those folks throughout the session. The better meetings are the meetings at home where you sit down at a conference table and there's 4 groups represented. Mm-hmm. Because they have gotten together to talk about a legislative agenda that affects a cross-section of people, of your constituents, who at first glance you might not have known were working together on something. But now you see a sheriff's deputy, a mental health counselor, a school counselor from a school, a physician, a university president, and they're all there to have lunch with you and to tell you, hey, we've been working on these 3 bills. And we're here in your home district, telling you what we think is important this next year. In my mind, that meeting goes a lot further than the meeting I'm going to have with the Sheriff's Association the first week of January. Now, I don't do that anymore. That's another life for me. But those were the meetings that really meant the most, if you will, because first of all, I'm looking at my constituents, right? I'm not looking at their representative in Nashville. I'm looking at my constituents who are my voters and live, and they're my neighbors a lot of times, people I've known all my life in some cases, and they're telling me jointly, these are the important things. Those, in my opinion, are really the way things ought to go, and the things that always kind of stuck in my head as I was working through the legislative session.
We have a question from the online audience.
Senator Finney and Representative Whitson, how likely would you say a temporary transfer law, there's currently about 21 states that have one, how likely do you think a temporary transfer law will pass in Tennessee?
Okay. You're talking about the,
How likely do you think it is that a temporary transfer law will pass in Tennessee?
excuse me, I didn't wear my hearing aids. My wife told me to wear my hearing aids and I didn't do it.
How likely do you think it is that a temporary transfer law will pass in Tennessee?
I don't see it passing this General Assembly, okay? We had an opportunity back during the special session to do that, but we still need to keep that on the front burner and advocate for that, because I think it's very important that we do that. And I think this is where Safer Tennessee and the coalitions that y'all build I feel one day will be successful in passing this. This session, I just don't see the, right now, the will to do that, but you never know.
I'd say that's probably exactly right. Until you get, again, those legislative leaders and especially a governor who says, now I'm going to make this a priority, and I'm going to make this a priority within the budget, within the things I care about. When that happens, and those at least 4 legislative leaders in each chamber, when they all decide to make it a priority, the chances of it passing increase significantly.
I offered to sponsor that last session during the special session, but could not get the traction to support we needed.
Thank you both so much. And this other question from the online audience is for Erin. If you could just one more time elaborate how citizens could collaborate to affect change at the legislature. Now, I know that Senator Finney and Representative Whitson sort of touched on this, but anything else you can add to that?
Sure. One of the things that we've done with Safer Tennessee is, I think demystified the process a little bit, is we've actually spent a fair amount of time down at the legislature. It seems kind of like a, you really feel a little bit removed from it, but it's open to the public. When legislative session starts, you can come down, sit in on the committee hearings, and kind of listen to these actual dialogues happening. My background was originally in with the U.S. Congress, and you don't really see quite the sausage making happening in the committees the way you do here at the state level. You really see the bills coming together in these meetings. So I think it's important, if you're a constituent that wants to be more engaged on these issues, and Safer Tennessee will be sharing in our weekly newsletter the Safer TN Tracker. We'll be sharing kind of what are the committees to watch, what are the bills to watch. Those are great ways to kind of go down and learn a little bit more about how things operate. And then it's also a great opportunity then to sit, as both Representative Whitson and Senator Finney mentioned, to spend time in person with your legislator and kind of share that personal story. I think it's also, and if you don't have the ability to easily travel to Nashville, to the Capitol, organizing, a gathering in your home and doing like a letter writing campaign. That's one way to engage folks. And also, we did just pass the elections, and we are a little ways out now before we'll have another election for all 99 House seats and and half the Senate seats. But our primary elections are so important to show up and vote, and in those local elections especially, we had, I believe it was 5 House seats that were won by less than 200 votes. That's such a small margin. So you can see how much it matters. If you're getting your book club and your Bible study group or your local Rotary group to make sure they show up and vote, how that can really even influence an election and who's your representative. So all those things matter.
All right, last question.
Yeah, I just had a question about whether or not you guys could talk about, I think one of the problems with firearm safety in Tennessee is not just that there are not that many laws regarding firearm safety, but it's also about enforcement of the laws that we currently do have. And I wonder, from the legislative perspective, if you could talk about whether or not you think that's a problem for legislators to fix, or if that's a problem that law enforcement or local governments need to address as far as making sure that those laws are being carried out. I'm thinking firearms dispossession for people who are dangerous.
Well, when you start talking about enforcement, you raise a lot of issues because in some ways what you're saying is if somebody's breaking the law, if they've got a criminal history, for instance, that person's probably going to go to jail for a while. Well, that costs a lot of money. That's a bill that's going to be behind the budget. So I can tell you from personal experience, and you too, Sam, I'm sure, I carried a lot of criminal law bills that never got a vote. They look good on paper, and we wanted to pass them, but because they cost money, and because the Sheriff's Association rightfully said, you know, we don't have room in our jails, and also we're not getting reimbursed because the state pays a reimbursement rate, and then the Department of Corrections says, yeah, our budget won't allow us to put more people in the penitentiary. You got all these forces coming in at the same time, so it's not for lack of interest. And I would tell you, it's not for lack of interest from the law enforcement communities for the most part. I mean, the folks I see, even in my law practice, I know that they're very interested in doing those kinds of things or would be interested in doing those kind of things. But anytime you put a bill forward like that, one of the things is going to be, okay, so you've got a new criminal law, or you're strengthening the penalty of an existing criminal law. And if you're doing that, how are you going to pay for it? And if you don't have the money, you're not going to pass the law. We talked for years, so the federal law for years said if you were a felon and you were found possessing a handgun, you were committing a new crime that sent you to prison for a specific period of time, very stiff penalties. It took a long time to pass something like that in Tennessee, which was not even as expansive at the time. It just takes time because you want to get in the governor's budget. You want to be in that budget in January. You don't want to be talking about it in March because it's going to be really hard. That's just one example that I can think of right away when you start talking about how to enforce and is there interest to do something like that? I think there's always interest to do something like that if you can get in the budget.
Just simply increasing the penalty of a misdemeanor from one class to the next it will incur a cost and will probably run into opposition in the budget process.
Yeah.
Thank you guys, both online and also here in person. We are so grateful that you took time out to learn a bit about this organization and hear from these wonderful lawmakers, Representative Whitson and Senator Finney.
Thank
Erin,
you,
we're
Abby.
so glad y'all took the time this afternoon. It was really informational.
Thank you.
I actually personally learned a lot, so thank you so much for being here and taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
for this opportunity.
Thank you, and thank you all for watching. We hope you have a wonderful day. We're going to post this webinar online so that you can see it in full if you missed any part of it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
I spent 26 years around firearms and I need hearing aids right now. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Sam.